Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. Beaumont Tiles is an Australian icon, not unlike Bob Beaumont and his father, who founded the country's largest tile retailer. So how did they do it? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Today, Beaumont Tiles has a turnover of close to $250 million. But let us take you back to the start of Beaumont Tiles, to Bob Beaumont's father, an entrepreneurial type who started the business in 1960 after he heard there was a shortage of tiles. He had an importing licence, so he thought he'd give it a go. 8 years later, young Bob joined him, and through the decades to follow, Bob's led the company through thick and thin to achieve remarkable success. So, how's he done it? Well, Bob has some business principles that he's always stuck to, like dream huge but plan carefully, set goals but with constant review, put your people first and your franchisees, know where your money is ahead of time, and always do the right thing. We reckon they're lessons for all of us, especially during COVID. Because, you see, Bob's never let adversity get in the way of opportunity. Don't become victims of circumstance, he says. And in this episode, the first of several, Bob takes us back to the year 2000 to illustrate his point. First, though, planning. Bob's a stickler for it. Heather Dawson asks him why.
Well, they say if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. And I think that's absolutely true. And the other saying they say about planning is you plan your work and you work your plan. But it's very important also to be prepared to improvise, because they say a plan never survives the first engagement with the enemy. And that's absolutely right. And things will go wrong, and you've got to be prepared to improvise wisely without knee-jerk reaction, but you've got to be prepared to improvise. But as much as possible, plan and make sure you do it really, really well. These days with things like Google Sheets and so on, it makes it so much easier to plan a good plan.
Yeah. Well, plan, but as you say, stay open to unexpected opportunities. And you've done that at Beaumont Tiles, haven't you? Probably many times. But tell us about the early days back when Beaumont Tiles bought Southport Tiles in Queensland.
We did that in 2000. So that's 21 years ago. That was the biggest thing we ever did. We were, at that stage, the largest tile merchant in Australia, but still really amateurish, really fragmented. And the only reason we were the largest was because everybody else was smaller than us, not because we were particularly large. And we weren't. And we were in Victoria and South Australia and ACT. And we heard that Southport Ceramics was being put up for sale by their owners, Boral. And so we put up our hand to be interested in this and to put forward an offer. There was a lot of negotiation and so on. And keep in mind, we were pre-rank amateurs, and we didn't have the money. We were always short of money, always. And so we had to be prepared to sell 25% of the shares of the business to another party to get the funds to buy Southport Ceramics. And it was a little bit like a minnow swallowing a whale, because they were a pretty large organisation in Queensland. They had the market by the throat in Queensland and had, I think it was 16 stores from Ballina all the way up to Cairns. And so taking them on was a massive undertaking when we didn't have much in the way of expert staff. And so we really struggled a bit with that because firstly, we didn't want to sell part of the company. And secondly, we didn't have the resources to do it. But we did it. One of our managers, our Victorian manager, Viv Shopping, who has now retired, he always used to say, Bob, you bite off more than you can chew and then you chew like buggery.
And it was successful though, wasn't it?
It was tremendously successful and it was the best thing we ever did. And in fact, a few years later, we were able to buy back that 25% of the business.
But did you think back then that Beaumont Tiles would become as big as it really has become now?
No, I didn't think that. I thought we would become big. I set a goal to become the largest in Australia, and we did. I set a goal to turn over $100 million, and now total turnover is closer to $250 million. But I didn't think it would be that big. And way back when I started, and certainly for the 70s and 80s, it was really a matter of survival, and it was a matter of year to year, would we be able to survive? It wasn't a matter of how big could we get. We didn't even have any aspirations before about 1990 that we would become significant players in other states.
You know, Mazars has been a long-time supporter of SoundCartel, and now they're helping us bring you this podcast. To find out how Mazars can support your business, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.
Well, through all the ups and downs of the early years, Bob, you say that the year 2000 was a very significant year. So what happened in the year 2000 that was so meaningful to you?
Well, Heather, it was an interesting one. I was writing the history of Beaumont Tiles, and I was writing down all of the various things that happened, and I suddenly realised, my goodness, look at the year 2000. Look what happened in that year. And let me just share with you some of the things that happened in 2000. Firstly, we put our new ERP computer system in at the end of 1999. And so we were just bedding that down in 2000. And that would have been a massive undertaking just by itself. Anytime you change your complete computer system, it's a huge undertaking. So we were still bedding that down. Then, of course, you may remember, although you would have been a kid at the time, about Y2K, the millennium bug. Well, that happened, and that was huge at the time, where you had to pull your business apart and make sure that it was all going to go okay after the year 2000. So that was the Y2K. Then one of our competitors, Tile Supplies in South Australia, who had been our nemesis for many years before we surpassed them substantially, came on the market. So we thought, wow, this is great, we'll buy them. So we bought Tile Supplies, and that would have been a big step just on its own, because they were still a substantial business, and they had a renovation side as well. And so we had never done renovation, and so we took that on as well. And so we started Beaumont Bathrooms, which no longer exists, but we started that. And it was quite a big thing because we franchised it to a number of people, and it was really a very good idea, probably lacked a lot in the execution. And then in South Australia, we had a competitor come from Queensland to start up right near our main head office. We thought, that's really cheeky. So we started up a separate brand, Tile Attack, right next to them, just to send a message to the marketplace, don't do that. And then in Victoria, one of our competitors wanted to sell their business on Sydney Road because they were consolidating, and we wanted a place on Sydney Road, so we bought that. And we took that over, which turned out to be very much a different culture to us, and it was a real hard slog. And even that would have been, a big thing just on its own in 1 year. But that was just another thing. And then we moved our main distribution centre in Victoria to Mount Waverley. That's a huge undertaking to move your whole distribution centre. But we did that too. And then, of course, there was the wonderful GST, which was introduced by the government at the end of June, and very poorly executed. And so it meant that everybody wanted to buy their stuff before the end of June. We had to have massive overtime and difficulties applied to all of that. And then after the end of June, in July, the market just dived. It just bombed. And we thought, okay, that's only going to be for a month or so because people will get used to GST and they'll come back. But oh no, they stayed away in droves. And there was a huge dip in all businesses that had anything to do with GST over that time. And that was just another huge undertaking. As a result of that, our bank came along and said, oh, look, we see that your sales have dropped over the last 3 months. We're going to put in a forensic accountant. We thought, what? You are got to be kidding. And so they came to the conclusion, because our sales went down for a very valid reason for a short period, that they didn't want to have anything to do with us anymore. So we were left without a bank. And so we had to dive around and find another bank, which we did. And so we changed to Westpac, and we were delighted with them. And they rescued us from a difficult situation, which is unusual for a bank to do, I've got to say. But that bank, we have never allowed them to quote on our business ever again. Even 20 years later, we still don't. Can you hold a grudge in business? Then, of course, there was the fact that we had to sell 25% of the business. Now, that's a pretty big undertaking, because we needed to fund the purchase of Southport Ceramics. So we had to sell 25% of the business. And with all the administrative kerfuffle that you have to go through to do that, that was huge in itself. And then, of course, there was the take-on of Southport Ceramics. And that was really big. And a number of us moved to Queensland for several months to enable us to effect a good cultural transfer. And it was a huge undertaking, made even more complex by the fact that we decided to change their computer system over in one hit to our new computer system, which we did, and we did a really, really good job. I was so proud of our team. We did the most fantastic job taking on Southport. And then we had the first sales conference we ever ran. That was just slotted in there as well. And so that was another big thing. So it was incredible. That year 2000, we did so much. And I think to myself, it's amazing what you can achieve when you don't feel like a victim, when you don't feel that the world's coming down on you. Because we were on the front foot, we were running, we thought this is fantastic. And when we got to the end of the year, we said, what's next? So,
Wow.
You know, I think it's important to keep your positivity and your goal for the future going really strongly and run. Don't just let yourself become a victim. It doesn't work.
That was CEO and Executive Chairman of Beaumont Tiles, Bob Beaumont. And we'll be hearing more from Bob soon about goal setting, managing cash, people power, franchising, and the art of successful selling, which is something Bob has very clearly mastered. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Executive producer is Heather Dawson. Producers are Nick Schilberger, Chris Ashmore, and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts and Belinda Trimboli. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more B Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.